My father looked me dead in the eye at his business dinner and said, "You're just a waitress. Honey, let the adults talk." But when his million-dollar client Jacob Miller walked in and froze, staring at me like he'd seen a ghost, my dad's smug smile vanished. What did Jacob see that made my father's face go pale? I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The text message from my father came at 4:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Dinner tonight. Montague's Steakhouse. 7 p.m. Don't be late. Wear something presentable. I stared at my phone screen, standing in the middle of my cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn. The late afternoon sun cut through the window, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air. My father, David Young, hadn't contacted me in 8 months. Not since last Christmas, when he'd made it abundantly clear that my life choices disappointed him. I should have ignored the message. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to delete it and go back to the financial reports I'd been reviewing. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that small, pathetic part of me that still craved his approval, even after all these years. I texted back a simple, "Okay." Montague's Steakhouse sat in the heart of Manhattan's financial district, the kind of place where a single appetizer cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. The clientele wore watches that could pay off student loans and discussed mergers over 30-year-old scotch. It was exactly the type of establishment my father loved: ostentatious, expensive, and designed to make people feel either powerful or insignificant. I arrived at 6:55 p.m., deliberately early. My father hated tardiness, considered it a sign of disrespect and poor character. The hostess, an elegant woman in her 30s with a sleek black dress, greeted me with a professional smile. "Reservation name?" she asked. "Young. David Young." Her eyes flickered with recognition. "Ah, yes, Mr. Young's party. You're the first to arrive. Right this way, please." She led me through the main dining room, past tables of suited executives and their perfectly coiffed companions, toward a private dining area in the back. The room was smaller, more intimate, with dark wood paneling and a single rectangular table that could seat 8. Crystal glasses caught the light from an ornate chandelier overhead. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" the hostess asked. "Just water, please." Still, not sparkling. She nodded and disappeared, leaving me alone in the private room. I chose a seat in the middle of the table, not at the head. That would be my father's spot, but not at the far end either. A strategic position that said I belonged here without presuming. Authority. My father arrived at exactly 7 p.m. Punctuality was one of his few virtues. He walked into the private dining room with the bearing of a man who owned every space he entered. At 58, David Young still cut an impressive figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked dark hair swept back from his face. His suit was bespoke, probably Brioni, with a tie that cost more than my monthly MetroCard pass. "Scarlet," he said, his tone neutral. Not warm, but not hostile either. He didn't move to hug me or shake my hand. Physical affection had never been his strong suit. "Dad," I replied, standing briefly before sitting back down. He took the head of the table, adjusting his cufflinks before looking at me properly. His eyes swept over my appearance, the simple black dress I'd chosen, my minimal jewelry, my hair pulled back in a neat bun. I could see him cataloging every detail, making his assessments. "You look well," he said finally, "though you could use some sun. You're too pale." "I've been busy." "Busy." He repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. "Still working at that diner in Queens?" My jaw tightened. "I waitress part-time, yes." Part-time. Another echo, another judgment. "And the rest of the time?" "I have other commitments." A waiter appeared, saving me from elaborating. My father ordered a bourbon, neat, and informed the waiter that we'd be expecting 2 additional guests. The waiter nodded, left menus, and retreated. 2 guests? I asked. "Business associates," my father said, picking up his menu without looking at me. "This isn't a social dinner, Scarlett. I need you here for a specific reason. Of course. I should have known better than to think this was about reconnecting. David Young didn't do anything without a calculated purpose. What reason? I asked. He set down his menu, finally meeting my eyes. One of my potential investors has certain traditional values. He appreciates family men, wants to see that his business partners have stable personal lives, strong family connections. It looks good. Understanding dawned slowly, then all at once. You want me here as a prop. I want you here as my daughter, he corrected, though his tone suggested there wasn't much difference in his mind. Is that so difficult? We have dinner. You smile politely, maybe mention that you're proud of your father's accomplishments. It's a few hours of your time, Scarlett. Surely even you can manage that. The condescension in his voice was familiar, worn smooth by years of similar conversations. This was the father I knew, the one who saw people as chess pieces, useful only for what they could provide. I'd been foolish to expect anything different. And what do I get out of this? I asked. His eyebrows rose slightly. What do you get? How about an expensive meal? An evening in civilization instead of whatever dive bar you probably frequent? The opportunity to be part of something significant instead of serving coffee to truck drivers? I felt heat rise in my chest, that old familiar anger that came from being perpetually underestimated. But I swallowed it down, kept my expression neutral. Getting emotional would only confirm his low opinion of me. Fine, I said quietly. I'll play along. Good. He returned to his menu, the matter settled in his mind. His name is Jacob Miller. He's CEO of Miller & Associates, a private equity firm based in Boston. Very successful, very connected. This deal could mean expansion into the New England market for my firm. I knew who Jacob Miller was. Of course I knew. But I said nothing, just nodded and pretended to study my own menu. The waiter returned with my father's bourbon. We ordered filet mignon for him, salmon for me, and settled into uncomfortable silence. My father checked his phone periodically, thumbs moving across the screen as he responded to emails. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, watching him and wondering how we'd become such strangers. At 7:23 p.m., my father's other guest arrived first. Thomas Chen was a senior partner at my father's investment firm, a man I vaguely remembered from a company holiday party years ago. He greeted my father warmly, accepted a scotch from the waiter, and took a seat across from me. He smiled politely in my direction, but didn't ask my name or attempt conversation. I did scenery, background decoration for my father's business theater, Jacob texted, Thomas said to my father. Running about 10 minutes late. Traffic on the FDR was backed up. No problem, my father replied. Gives us time to go over the proposal one more time. They launched into discussion of terms and projections, talking around me as if I were invisible. I sipped my water and observed them. These men in their expensive suits discussing millions of dollars with casual ease. This was my father's world. Power, money, influence. Everything he'd built, everything he valued, everything he'd wanted me to be part of, once. At 7:31 p.m., Jacob Miller walked into the private dining room, and everything changed. Jacob Miller was not what I expected. Most CEOs in his position carried themselves with aggressive confidence, loud voices filling rooms before their bodies did. But Jacob moved quietly, deliberately. He was probably in his mid-40s, with sandy brown hair starting to gray at the temples and sharp blue eyes that seemed to absorb everything at once. His suit was impeccable but understated, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with a burgundy tie that suggested taste without ostentation. David, Thomas, my apologies for the delay, he said, shaking hands with both men. His voice was smooth, cultured, with the faintest trace of a Boston accent. The traffic coming down from... He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had landed on me, and something flickered across his face. Surprise? Recognition? I couldn't quite place it, but the change was unmistakable. He stood frozen for a moment, his hand still extended from shaking Thomas's hand, staring at me with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. My father noticed the pause. Jacob, this is my daughter Scarlett. I thought it would be nice to make this a more personal evening, including family. Jacob didn't respond immediately. He continued to look at me, his expression shifting through several emotions I couldn't quite read. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Not the polite, professional smile he'd given my father and Thomas, but something different. Something genuine, mixed with what looked like disbelief. "Scarlett Young," he said, my name coming out almost like a question, though he clearly knew the answer. "Mr. Miller," I replied carefully, extending my hand. He took it, his grip firm but brief. "Please, call me Jacob." He finally tore his gaze away from me to look at my father. "David, you didn't mention your daughter was Scarlett Young." My father's expression showed mild confusion. "I just did." "What?" "No, I mean..." Jacob reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved across the screen, searching for something. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, tension crackling like static electricity. Thomas looked between Jacob and me, puzzled. My father's confusion was giving way to irritation. "Jacob, I'm not sure I understand what..." my father began. Jacob found what he was looking for. He turned his phone around, showing the screen to my father. It was a magazine cover. Forbes from 3 months ago. The headline read, 30 Under 30, The Tech Innovators Reshaping Finance. And there, in the center of the cover, was my face. The silence that followed was absolute. My father took the phone from Jacob's hand, his movements mechanical. He stared at the screen, his face draining of color. Thomas leaned over to look, his eyes widening. "This is..." My father's voice came out hoarse. He cleared his throat, tried again. "This is some kind of joke." "No joke," Jacob said, his voice carrying a note of amusement now. He turned back to me. "I have to say, Ms. Young, I've been following your work for over a year. What you've built with Cipher Analytics is revolutionary. The predictive algorithms you developed for fraud detection, they're changing the entire industry." Thomas was now holding my father's phone, scrolling through what I assumed was the Forbes article. "David," he said quietly, "this says she founded a fintech company valued at $340 million. My father's hand trembled slightly as he took his phone back. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time all evening. "Is this real?" I met his gaze steadily. "Yes. You started a tech company? 5 years ago? Worth $340 million? The last valuation was actually $380 million, but the Forbes piece went to print before our Series C closed. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel." Now back to where we left off. The words hung in the air. My father's face cycled through expressions. Shock, confusion, something that might have been anger or might have been hurt. He set his phone down on the table with exaggerated care. "Sit, please," my father said to Jacob, though his eyes remained on me. His voice had taken on a strange quality, controlled but fragile, like ice over deep water. Jacob took the seat at the other end of the table, directly across from my father. I sat between them with Thomas to my right, suddenly the center of attention in a way I hadn't anticipated. The waiter appeared, blissfully unaware of the tension. Jacob ordered a gin and tonic and the evening's special. After the waiter departed, an uncomfortable silence settled over the table. "I don't understand," my father said finally, still looking at me. "You told me you worked at a diner." "I do work at a diner," I replied. "Sal's in Astoria. Thursday through Saturday, breakfast shift. But you run a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars." "Yes. How is that possible?" I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "The diner is owned by Sal Martinez. He gave me my first job when I was 18, fresh out of your house with nowhere to go. When his daughter got sick 2 years ago and he almost lost the business, I made sure that didn't happen. I work shifts when he needs extra help. It's important to me." Thomas was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Jacob, meanwhile, had leaned back in his chair, watching the exchange with barely concealed fascination. "When you say you founded this company 5 years ago..." My father's voice had taken on a calculating edge. the business mind reasserting itself over the shocked parent. That would have been 2020. You were 25. 24, actually. I incorporated in March, 2 weeks before my 25th birthday. Using what capital? There it was. The question I'd known would come eventually. My father couldn't conceive of success without inherited wealth or connections, without someone else's money opening doors. I bootstrapped the initial development, I said. Lived in a storage unit for 3 months, worked 4 part-time jobs, taught myself to code, built the first version of the algorithm on a laptop I bought from a pawn shop. When I had a working prototype, I pitched it to angel investors. And they just gave you money? Skepticism dripped from every word. They gave me $150,000 for 15% equity after. I demonstrated that my algorithm could detect fraudulent transactions, 23% more accurately than anything currently on the market. 6 months later, when we'd signed our first 3 clients, we raised $3 million in a seed round. 2 years after that, we closed a $25 million Series A. Last year, we raised $80 million in Series B and Series C combined. I recited the numbers flatly, without emotion. These were facts, data points, the same information I'd shared with investors and journalists and conference panels. But saying them here to my father felt surreal. Jacob was nodding along. What I find most impressive, he interjected, is that you built this without any of the traditional pedigree. No Ivy League degree, no connections in Silicon Valley, no family money. He glanced at my father. You did this entirely on your own merit. The implication hung heavy in the air. My father's jaw tightened. I had no idea, he said, and for the first time I heard something other than condescension in his voice. It might have been a regret. Or maybe I was imagining it. You never asked, I replied simply. Our meals arrived, a welcome interruption. The waiter set down plates with practiced efficiency. My father's filet mignon, my salmon, Thomas's ribeye, Jacob's duck confit. We sat in silence as the waiter ground pepper, refilled water glasses, and disappeared once more. Jacob cut into his duck, seemingly unperturbed by the tension. So, David, he said conversationally, you must be incredibly proud. Having a daughter featured in Forbes, building a company from nothing, disrupting an entire industry, that's quite a legacy. My father picked up his knife and fork but didn't cut into his steak. I'm still trying to process all of this. Of course, Jacob said smoothly. It must be quite a surprise. He turned to me. Ms. Young, I have to ask, and forgive me if this seems forward, but Miller & Associates has been looking to diversify our portfolio into fintech. We're particularly interested in AI-driven security and fraud prevention. Would Cipher Analytics be open to a conversation about potential investment or partnership? My father's head snapped up. Thomas stopped mid-chew. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt all evening. We're always open to conversations, Jacob. Though I should mention we're not actively seeking additional funding at the moment. Our runway is solid, and we're approaching profitability ahead of projections. Even better, Jacob said, his eyes bright with interest. Companies that don't need money are the ones worth investing in. How about this? I'm in the city through Friday. Could we schedule a proper meeting? I'd love to see a demo of your platform, hear more about your growth strategy. I'll have my assistant reach out to coordinate schedules, I said. My father was staring at me again, but this time there was something different in his expression. The dismissiveness had evaporated, replaced by something more complex. He opened his mouth, closed it, and seemed to struggle with what to say. Finally, he asked the question I'd been waiting for all evening. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me? The question lingered in the air like smoke. I set down my fork, the salmon suddenly unappetizing. Across the table, Thomas pretended to be very interested in his ribeye, while Jacob watched our exchange with the careful attention of someone witnessing something significant. When should I have told you? I asked, keeping my voice level. At Christmas last year, when you spent 20 minutes explaining why liberal arts colleges were ruining young people's work ethic? Or maybe the year before at Thanksgiving, when you told me I'd wasted my potential by not going to law school. My father's face reddened. That's not fair, isn't it? I picked up my water glass, more for something to do with my hands than from thirst. You've made your opinion of my choices crystal clear over the years. Dad, every conversation we've had for the past decade has been you telling me, directly or indirectly, that I'm a disappointment. I never said that. You didn't have to. Jacob cleared his throat softly. Perhaps Thomas and I should give you two some privacy. No, my father said sharply, then seemed to catch himself. No, please stay. We're fine. He looked back at me, and I saw him visibly trying to regain his composure, to slip back into the controlled businessman persona. Scarlett, I'm simply trying to understand the timeline here. You started this company 5 years ago? Yes. And you didn't think your own father deserved to know? I laughed, a short, bitter sound. I called you, actually. September of 2020. Do you remember what you were doing that month? He frowned, searching his memory. I was closing the Henderson deal. We were in negotiations for weeks. You were in San Francisco, I confirmed. I called you because I'd just gotten my first angel investment. I was terrified and excited and had no idea what I was doing, and I wanted to tell you about it. Maybe even ask for advice. Something flickered in his eyes, a memory surfacing. I don't recall that conversation. That's because we didn't have one. Your assistant answered. Sharon, I think her name was? She told me you were in meetings all week and couldn't be disturbed. I left a message asking you to call me back when you had time. You never did. My father's hand tightened around his bourbon glass. I was closing a $200 million deal. I know. I read about it in the Wall Street Journal. I took a breath, pushing down the old hurt that tried to surface. I tried again 6 months later when we signed our first major client. That time I got through to you, remember? I told you I had some exciting news about a project I was working on. You had 3 minutes between calls. You told me whatever it was, we could discuss it another time, and that I should really consider going back to school for a business degree if I was serious about my career. Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Jacob had stopped eating entirely, his attention fixed on us. I was trying to give you advice, my father said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. You were trying to fit me into the box you'd built for my life, I replied. The box where I go to Cornell or Yale, get a finance or law degree, marry someone from the right family, and join your firm as a junior analyst. You never asked what I wanted. You never asked what I was actually doing with my life. You assumed, because you were working at a diner. His voice rose, frustration bleeding through. What was I supposed to think? You had so much potential, Scarlett. You were brilliant in school, top of your class. And then you threw it all away to serve pancakes and coffee. I didn't throw anything away, I said, my own voice hardening. I made different choices than you wanted me to make. That doesn't mean they were wrong. You could have asked me for help, for capital, for connections. I could have introduced you to investors, opened doors. I didn't want your doors, I interrupted. I wanted to build something that was mine, something I earned without your name attached to it, without people wondering if I only succeeded because I was David Young's daughter. The words hit him visibly. He set down his glass with a sharp clink against the table. Jacob leaned forward slightly. If I may, he said carefully, what Scarlett accomplished is even more remarkable precisely because she did it independently, building a company from scratch, without connections or capital, in one of the most competitive and male-dominated industries in existence, that takes not just intelligence, but resilience, creativity, and sheer determination. He looked at my father with an expression that was professional but pointed. I've seen hundreds of startups, David. Most of them are founded by people with every advantage, Ivy League degrees, family money, industry connections, and most of them fail. What Scarlett built is extraordinary, not despite her path, but because of it. My father said nothing, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. He was recalculating, reassessing. It was what he did best, analyzing situations, adjusting strategies. I wondered if he was capable of doing the same with personal relationships, or if that skill set remained forever out of reach. Your company, he said finally, addressing me, Cipher Analytics. What exactly does it do? I'd explained my business 1,000 times. to investors, to clients, to journalists, at conferences and pitch meetings and boardrooms. But explaining it to my father felt different. This wasn't about securing funding or landing a contract. This was about making him see me, really see me, for the first time in years. We use machine learning and artificial intelligence to detect financial fraud in real time, I began. Traditional fraud detection systems rely on rules-based algorithms. Basically, they look for specific red flags that humans have programmed them to find. But fraud evolves constantly. Criminals adapt, find new loopholes, develop new techniques. Thomas had turned his full attention to me now, his food forgotten. What we built is different, I continued. Our system learns continuously. It analyzes billions of data points, transaction histories, behavioral patterns, network relationships, and identifies anomalies that wouldn't necessarily trigger traditional red flags. It adapts as fraud tactics evolve. The more data it processes, the smarter it gets. How accurate is it? My father asked. The businessman in him was taking over. I could see it. This was familiar ground. Metrics, performance, ROI. Our false positive rate is 91% lower than industry standard, I said. We catch fraud that other systems miss, and we do it without flagging legitimate transactions. For our clients, that means preventing losses while reducing the friction that drives customers away. Who are your clients? Currently, we work with 47 financial institutions across North America and Europe. 3 of the top 10 U.S. banks, several major credit card companies, and a growing number of fintech startups. We also recently signed contracts with 2 major e-commerce platforms. My father's expression had shifted entirely now. The shock and confusion had been replaced by something else: evaluation, assessment. He was looking at me the way he looked at potential acquisitions or investment opportunities. I wasn't sure if that was better or worse than being dismissed. Revenue? He asked. We're on track to hit $45 million this year, projecting $80 million next year if our current growth rate holds. Profit margin? We're not profitable yet. Still investing heavily in R&D and scaling our team. But our unit economics are strong. Each new client becomes profitable within 8 months on average. Team size? 83 employees. We're hiring aggressively, looking to add another 30 positions by the end of Q2. Jacob was smiling now, a broad, genuine smile. See, David? This is exactly what I'm talking about. Solid fundamentals, clear growth trajectory, proven product market fit. Scarlett's built something substantial here. My father nodded slowly, still processing. And you did all of this while working at a diner? I stopped working regular shifts at Sal's about 3 years ago, I explained. Now I just help out when he needs extra coverage. It keeps me grounded. Reminds me of where I started. That's... my father began, then paused. For a moment he looked lost, uncertain, an expression I'd never seen on his face before. That's actually quite admirable. The words were so unexpected that I almost didn't know how to respond. An apology would have been easier to process, or even continued skepticism. But this tentative praise, coming from a man who'd spent years making clear I'd disappointed him, left me off balance. Thank you, I said quietly. He picked up his fork and knife, finally cutting into his steak. The gesture felt significant somehow, a return to normalcy, even if nothing between us would ever be truly normal again. I have questions, he said after a moment. A lot of questions. About your business model, your competitive advantages, your long-term strategy. I'm happy to answer them, I replied. But not here. Not now. He looked around the private dining room as if suddenly remembering where we were. This was supposed to be a business dinner. I've been a poor host. Jacob waved his hand dismissively. On the contrary, this has been the most interesting business dinner I've had in years. He grinned at me. Though I do feel somewhat redundant now, I came here hoping to convince David to partner with my firm. But it seems he's got better investment opportunities right in his own family. My father's expression flickered at that, something complicated passing across his features. Pride, regret? Perhaps both. I'd like to take you to lunch, he said to me abruptly. Later this week. Just the two of us. If you're willing. I studied his face, looking for the catch, the ulterior motive. But all I saw was an older man, suddenly uncertain, trying to bridge a gap that had widened over years of mutual disappointment and misunderstanding. All right, I agreed. I can do Friday. Friday, he repeated, nodding. I'll have Sharon coordinate with your assistant. I don't have an assistant, I said. Just text me, he blinked, surprised again. A company worth hundreds of millions, and I answered my own messages. I could see him adding that to his mental file, another data point that didn't fit his preconceptions. The conversation shifted after that, becoming less charged. Jacob and my father discussed their potential partnership. Thomas contributed occasional comments, and I ate my salmon and observed. But something fundamental had changed in the room. The way my father looked at me had altered. I was no longer invisible, no longer just disappointing wallpaper in the background of his important business life. Whether that change would last beyond this dinner remained to be seen. The remainder of dinner passed in a strange, suspended reality. Jacob and my father discussed terms for their potential partnership, equity stakes, board representation, timeline for due diligence. Thomas contributed observations about market conditions and regulatory concerns. I listened, occasionally offering insights when the conversation touched on areas where my company's work intersected with their discussions. What struck me most was how my father kept glancing at me throughout the conversation. Not dismissively, not with the barely concealed disappointment I'd grown accustomed to, but with something closer to curiosity. Maybe even respect. Each time our eyes met, he looked away first, as if caught doing something he shouldn't. By the time dessert arrived, creme brulee for Jacob, tiramisu for Thomas, nothing for my father or me, the initial shock had settled into something more manageable. The elephant in the room had been acknowledged, examined, and while not entirely understood, at least no longer ignored. Scarlett, Jacob said, breaking through my thoughts as he set down his spoon. I meant what I said earlier about meeting this week. I'd genuinely love to learn more about Cipher Analytics. Beyond just investment potential, though that's certainly interesting, I think there might be some strategic synergies worth exploring. What kind of synergies? I asked. Miller & Associates has a substantial portfolio of companies in financial services. Payment processors, lending platforms, insurance tech startups. Many of them struggle with fraud prevention. Your solution could be valuable across multiple portfolio companies. My father leaned forward slightly. That's actually a smart play. Volume licensing across a portfolio could significantly reduce per-unit costs while providing Scarlett's company with predictable recurring revenue. I looked at him, surprised. He was analyzing my business now, seeing opportunities. The shift was disorienting. We've explored similar arrangements with other private equity firms, I said carefully. The challenge is always customization. Each company has different needs, different existing systems, different risk profiles. One-size-fits-all solutions don't work in fraud prevention. What if the customization was built into the platform? Thomas interjected, surprising me. He'd been quiet for most of the evening. Modular architecture, configurable parameters. Clients could essentially customize within defined boundaries. We're actually developing exactly that, I admitted. Our version 3.0 release, scheduled for Q3 next year, will include what we're calling adaptive frameworks. Clients can adjust sensitivity levels, define custom risk parameters, integrate with their specific tech stacks. Jacob's eyes lit up. That's exactly what the market needs. Most fraud prevention tools are either too rigid or too complex. Something that balances flexibility with ease of use. That's a winner. My father was nodding along, and I realized with a jolt that this was perhaps the first time in my adult life that he was taking me seriously as a business person. Not as his daughter who'd disappointed him, not as a waitress who'd wasted her potential, but as a legitimate entrepreneur with a valuable company. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt sad. All those years of dismissal, of being made to feel small and insignificant, and all it took was external validation from someone he wanted to impress. My accomplishments hadn't changed. They'd been real all along, but they only became real to him when someone else confirmed their worth. The waiter brought the check, and my father handed over his corporate card without looking at it. The kind of casual wealth that came from never having to think about the cost of dinner, even at a place like Montague's. "I'll walk out with you," Jacob said to me as we all stood, preparing to leave. "I'm headed uptown if you're going that direction." "Brooklyn, actually. But I'll walk toward the subway with you." We gathered our things: Jacob's briefcase, my purse, my father's phone, which he checked compulsively. Thomas excused himself to use the restroom. My father and I stood near the door of the private dining room, suddenly alone together for the first time since the Forbes revelation. "Scarlett," he began, then stopped. Started again. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." "I think I do." He ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair, a gesture of uncertainty I'd rarely seen from him. "I made assumptions. About your life, about your choices. I was wrong." The admission hung between us. It wasn't quite an apology, but from David Young, it might be as close as I'd get. "You were wrong about a lot of things," I said quietly. But the biggest mistake wasn't assuming I'd failed. It was never asked. Never caring enough to actually find out what I was doing with my life. He flinched slightly at that. "You're right. I know I am." "This lunch on Friday," he said, meeting my eyes. "I'd like it to be about more than just your company. I'd like to understand how we got here. How we became strangers." "We became strangers because you decided I wasn't worth your time," I replied, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Years of hurt and anger, and it came out as a simple fact. Every time I tried to connect with you, you were too busy. Every accomplishment that didn't fit your vision for my life was dismissed or ignored. Eventually, I stopped trying. "I see that now." "Do you?" I challenged myself. "Or do you just see a business opportunity? A daughter who's suddenly successful enough to be worth your attention?" The words were harsh, but they needed to be said. I'd carried them for too long, letting them fester in silence. My father opened his mouth, closed it. Struggled with something internal. Finally, "I won't pretend I've been a good father. The evidence suggests otherwise. But I'd like the chance to do better. If you're willing to give me that chance?" Thomas emerged from the restroom before I could respond. Jacob appeared from the main dining room, having checked his coat. The moment passed, the conversation suspended but not finished. We walked out together, through the elegant dining room where business deals were made over expensive wine, past the hostess who smiled professionally, into the cool October night. Manhattan stretched around us, all glass and steel in perpetual motion. "My car's just around the corner," my father said. "Can I give you a ride?" "I prefer the subway," I replied. Old habits, old independence. I'd taken the subway even when I could afford not to, even after Cypher Analytics started generating real revenue. It kept me connected to the city, to reality, to who I'd been before success. He nodded, understanding or at least accepting this small rejection. "Friday then? Noon?" "There's a place in Tribeca Gardenia, excellent Italian. Let's meet somewhere less expensive," I interrupted. "Somewhere normal," a pause. Then, "All right, where?" "There's a cafe in Greenwich Village, Bluestone Coffee. They have good sandwiches. Nothing fancy." I could see him processing this. His daughter, who ran a company worth hundreds of millions, suggesting a casual cafe instead of an expense account restaurant. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit his preconceptions. "Bluestone Coffee," he repeated. "Noon on Friday." "I'll be there." Jacob and I walked together toward the subway station, leaving my father and Thomas to their car. The October air was crisp, autumn settling into the city with a promise of the cold to come. Around us, the financial district was winding down, office workers heading home or to late meetings, the eternal churn of commerce and ambition. "That was quite a dinner," Jacob said after we'd walked a block in silence. "That's one way to put it." He laughed, a genuine sound. "I hope I didn't make things more complicated. I probably should have waited, let you tell your father on your own terms." "There were no good terms," I said. "He wasn't going to hear it from me. Maybe he needed to hear it from someone else, someone whose opinion he actually values. Jacob glanced at me sideways. That bothers you. It wasn't a question. It bothers me that I care, I admitted. I built something incredible. I changed an industry. I made Forbes 30 under 30 list. I did all of that without him, despite him, and I should be past needing his approval. But apparently, some part of me is still that girl who just wanted her father to be proud of her. That doesn't make you weak, Jacob said gently. That makes you human. We reached the subway entrance, the stairs descending into the earth, into the veins of the city. I paused at the top. Thank you, I said. For the business opportunity, yes, but also for seeing me. For recognizing what I built. You're hard to miss, he replied with a smile. I meant what I said. Your work is exceptional. I'll have my office reach out tomorrow to schedule that meeting. Looking forward to it. He hailed a cab, and I descended into the subway, swiping my card at the turnstile and finding my way to the platform. The F train arrived 3 minutes later, and I squeezed into a car full of tired commuters, students with backpacks, couples heading out for late dinners. In the window's reflection, I could see myself, 30 years old, wearing a designer dress I'd bought to impress a father who hadn't even known what I'd accomplished. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is David. I got your number from the reservation system. I hope that's all right. I just wanted to say thank you for coming tonight. I know I didn't deserve your presence, but I'm grateful for it. See you Friday? Dad! I stared at the message for a long moment. The train rattled through the tunnel, lights flickering. Around me, people scrolled through phones, read books, dozed against windows. The mundane reality of city life, continuing regardless of personal revelations. I typed back. See you Friday. Simple. Non-committal. But a door left open, at least a crack. The train emerged from underground briefly, crossing the Manhattan Bridge, and through the window I could see Brooklyn spreading before me. My adopted home? The place I'd built my life and my company. The city lights reflected off the East River, turning the water to liquid gold. My phone buzzed again. This time, a message from my company's head of engineering, Lisa Chen. Hope the dinner went well. Also, heads up, TechCrunch wants to do a feature on our V3 development. An interview request came in this afternoon. Want me to schedule it? I smiled and typed back, schedule it. And dinner was educational. Good education or weird education? Definitely weird. Tell you tomorrow. The train dove back underground, and I leaned back against the seat, letting the rhythm of the tracks wash over me. Tomorrow I'd go back to my office, to my team, to the company I'd built from nothing. But tonight, I'd unlocked something I hadn't expected. A chance at reconciliation with the man whose approval I'd stopped hoping for years ago. Whether that reconciliation would actually happen, whether my father was capable of the kind of change that would make a relationship possible, remained to be seen. But for the first time in a very long time, I was willing to find out. Wednesday morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through my apartment windows. I woke at 6, habit overriding the late night, and lay there for a moment staring at the ceiling. The previous evening felt almost dreamlike. The dinner, the revelation, my father's shocked face when Jacob showed him the Forbes cover. My phone showed 17 notifications. 3 from my leadership team, 2 from potential clients, 1 from a venture capital firm I'd never heard of, and 11 from journalists. Word traveled fast, apparently. Someone at Montague's had either recognized me or overheard enough of the conversation to leak something to the tech press gossip channels. I groaned and rolled out of bed. My apartment in Brooklyn was modest by the standards of someone running a $380 million company. 1 bedroom, decent kitchen, a living room that doubled as my home office when I didn't feel like going into Manhattan. I could afford something larger, something in a doorman building with a view, but this place suited me. It reminded me where I'd started, the storage unit, the pawn shop laptop, the years of struggling to make rent while building something from nothing. Coffee first. Always coffee first. While the machine hummed and dripped, I scrolled through the messages. Lisa had sent updates about the TechCrunch interview and flagged a bug in the latest build that needed attention. Marcus, my CFO, wanted to discuss Q4 projections, and Priya, who ran business development, had forwarded 3 new partnership inquiries that had come in overnight. Nothing about last night. My team didn't know yet that I'd had dinner with my father, that years of estrangement had cracked open, that everything had shifted in the space of a few hours. The coffee finished brewing. I poured a cup, added cream, and stood by the window watching Brooklyn wake up. Below, a bodega was opening its gates. A jogger passed by with a dog. Delivery trucks double-parked. Normal life, continuing its relentless forward motion. My phone rang. Unknown number, but with a Manhattan area code. Scarlett Young, I answered. Ms. Young, this is Rachel Torres from Bloomberg Technology. I'm hoping you have a few minutes to discuss... I'm sorry, I interrupted politely. I don't do unsolicited press calls. If you'd like to arrange an interview, please contact our communications director through our website. Of course I understand. I just thought since there was some activity last night at Montague's involving you and Jacob Miller. I ended the call, so it was already out there, whatever version of events someone had concocted. The tech journalism ecosystem operated at lightning speed, hungry for stories about founders, failures, and drama. A 30 under 30 founder having dinner with a major PE investor? That was content gold. 3 more calls came in rapid succession, all from numbers I didn't recognize. I silenced my phone and focused on my coffee. By 7:30, I was showered and dressed. Dark jeans, a charcoal sweater, ankle boots. Professional, but not corporate. I'd learned early that dressing like a Silicon Valley bro didn't work for me, but neither did trying to outsuit the finance guys. I'd found my own style somewhere in between, and it worked. The subway ride to my office in Soho was mercifully uneventful. I plugged in headphones, pulled up a playlist, and let the music drown out the train noise. No one recognized me. No one cared. Just another Wednesday morning commuter in a city of millions. Cypher Analytics occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse building. We'd moved here 2 years ago, upgrading from our original space in a questionable part of Brooklyn. The office was open plan, but not obnoxiously so. Clusters of desks, private meeting rooms, a kitchen area that actually functioned, exposed brick walls covered with whiteboards full of algorithms and flowcharts. Morning? Boss? Called out James from the security desk. He was ex-military, our head of physical security, and one of my earliest hires. Morning, James. Quiet night? Always is. Though we did have someone try to deliver flowers at midnight. Send them away. Flowers? He shrugged. Probably a wrong address, or press trying to get access. I made a mental note to brief James about potential increased attention. The office was mostly empty this early. A few engineers who kept odd hours, one of our data scientists who claimed to think better before sunrise. I waved to them and headed to my office, a glass-walled room in the corner that gave me privacy when I needed it, but kept me visible to the team. Lisa was already at my door, 2 coffees in hand despite the early hour. Saw you come in on the security feed, she said, handing me one of the cups. Figured you could use reinforcements. You're a lifesaver. We settled into my office, Lisa in one of the chairs facing my desk, me in my well-worn office chair that I'd refused to replace despite Marcus's protests that it looked unprofessional. So, Lisa said, eyeing me over her coffee, want to tell me why TechCrunch, The Information, and Bloomberg all reached out this morning asking for quotes about you and Jacob Miller? I sighed. I had dinner last night with my father. The father you never mention and haven't seen in months? That one. He invited me to a business dinner. Turns out Jacob Miller was the potential investor he was trying to impress. Lisa's eyes widened. Oh shit, yeah. Jacob recognized me from the Forbes cover. My father had no idea who I was or what I'd built. It was dramatic. I need you to understand that this is the most interesting thing that's happened in this office in 6 months, Lisa said, leaning forward. Please tell me everything. I gave her the abbreviated version. The dismissive introduction, Jacob's recognition, the Forbes reveal, my father's shock. Lisa listened with increasing delight, occasionally interjecting with comments like, "No way," and "Your father is kind of terrible." "So what happens now?" she asked when I finished. "Now? We have a company to run. Jacob wants to meet about potential partnerships across his portfolio. That's actually good for business, regardless of the family drama. And your father? We're having lunch Friday, attempting to, I don't know, figure out if there's any relationship worth salvaging." Lisa studied me for a moment. "Do you want there to be?" It was a good question, one I'd been avoiding asking myself directly. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to tell him to go to hell. He spent years making me feel worthless. Why should I give him another chance just because he finally figured out I'm successful? But he's still my father. And maybe, despite everything, I want to believe people can change. That relationship can be repaired. "That's very mature of you," Lisa said. "I'd probably just send him a glitter bomb," I laughed, which broke some of the tension that had been building in my chest since I woke up. "Anyway," I said, steering the conversation back to safer territory. "What's this bug you mentioned?" We spent the next 40 minutes diving into technical details, an edge case in our fraud detection algorithm that was causing false positives under specific conditions. It was the kind of problem-solving I loved, pure and uncomplicated. Code either worked or it didn't. Unlike human relationships, there were clear answers. By 9, the office had filled up. My calendar showed back-to-back meetings until 3. Product review with the engineering leads, budget discussion with Marcus, a demo for a potential client, strategy session for the V3 rollout. At 9:30, Priya stuck her head into my office between meetings. "Quick question. Jacob Miller's office just called. They want to schedule a meeting for tomorrow afternoon. Should I set it up?" "Tomorrow?" I pulled up my calendar. "I have that investor call at 2. They suggested 4:30. Would give you time between," I considered it. Moving fast could be good. Strike while the interest was hot. But it also meant less time to prepare, less time to think through strategy. "Do it," I decided. "Set it for 4:30 tomorrow. Conference room B and Priya, let's keep this internal for now. I don't want the whole team spinning theories about why Jacob Miller is suddenly interested in partnerships," she grinned. "Too late. The whole office knows something happened last night. James mentioned the flowers, someone saw the press inquiries, and now there are at least 3 different theories circulating. My favorite is that you're secretly engaged to a billionaire. I'm not engaged to anyone. That's what someone secretly engaged would say. Get out of my office." She laughed and disappeared, leaving me shaking my head. This was the downside of a relatively small company. Everyone knew everyone else's business, or at least thought they did. My phone buzzed with a text. My father. Sharon reached out about Friday lunch. She said you prefer Bluestone Coffee in Greenwich Village. I've never been there. Looking forward to it. Simple message. But it represented something significant. My father going somewhere he'd never been. Somewhere I'd chosen. Adapting to my preferences instead of expecting me to adapt to his, I typed back, "See you then, noon." Another message came through almost immediately, but this time from an unknown number. "Hi, Scarlett, this is Jacob Miller. Got your number from my assistant. Hope that's all right. Looking forward to our meeting tomorrow. I've been reading about Cypher's fraud prevention protocols. Really impressive work. Also, I hope dinner last night wasn't too awkward. Your father seemed genuinely stunned." "Best, Jacob," I smiled at the understatement. Stunned didn't quite cover my father's expression when he'd seen that Forbes cover. "Not awkward at all," I lied smoothly. "See you tomorrow." Marcus appeared at my door, tablet in hand, looking stressed. "We need to talk about the budget projections. Some of the hiring costs are running higher than expected and—" "Come in," I said, pushing thoughts of my father and Jacob aside. "Show me the numbers." This was my real life, spreadsheets and algorithms, hiring decisions and product roadmaps. The dinner at Montague's had been a disruption, a collision of my carefully separated worlds. But today, I had a company to run. The family drama could wait, at least until Friday. I threw myself into work with the kind of focus that had built Cipher Analytics in the first place. Marcus and I wrestled with budget numbers until we found compromises that kept our growth trajectory intact without burning through cash too quickly. The product demo went smoothly, a mid-sized regional bank that was impressed by our detection rates and ease of integration. The V3 strategy session produced solid action items and a clearer timeline for release. By 3 o'clock, when my scheduled meetings ended, I was exhausted but satisfied. This was what I was good at: building, solving problems, leading a team toward a shared vision. My phone showed 2 missed calls from my father and a text from him. "Sorry, didn't mean to bother you. Just wanted to confirm Friday." Talk then. I felt a pang of something. Guilt? Sympathy? I'd been ignoring his attempts at connection, punishing him with silence the way he'd punished me with dismissal for years. Maybe that made me petty. Or maybe it made me human. I texted back, confirmed. Looking forward to it. Not entirely true, but not entirely false either. I was curious, at least. Curious to see if my father could actually change, if the shock of last night would translate into genuine effort at understanding, rather than just recalculating my worth in his mental ledger. The office was winding down. People packing up or shifting into evening work mode. I should go home, decompress, maybe call my college roommate who always gave good advice. Instead, I found myself pulling up old photos on my phone, childhood pictures I'd saved in a folder I rarely opened. There was one from my 8th birthday. My father was younger, less gray, smiling genuinely as I blew out candles. Before disappointment had settled between us like sediment. Before I'd failed to become whatever version of success he'd imagined for me. "Are you still here?" Lisa had returned, jacket on, bag over her shoulder. "Just finishing up," I said, closing the photos. "You okay?" "Yeah, just thinking. About Friday?" "About everything." She nodded, understanding without me having to explain. "Want some advice?" "Always. Whatever happens with your father, remember that you built something amazing without him. Your worth isn't determined by whether he finally sees it. You already know what you're capable of. When did you become so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just weren't listening." She left, and I sat in my glass-walled office, watching the sunset paint the exposed brick walls gold. Tomorrow I'd meet with Jacob Miller about partnerships. Friday I'd have lunch with my father and attempt some form of reconciliation. But tonight, I was just Scarlett Young, founder and CEO, sitting in the company she'd built from nothing, wondering if success was supposed to feel this complicated. Thursday afternoon arrived with unseasonable warmth, October pretending to be September for one last day. I'd spent the morning preparing for the meeting with Jacob Miller, pulling together data on our portfolio performance, drafting potential partnership structures, briefing Lisa and Marcus on what to expect. At 4:15, Jacob arrived with 2 members of his team. I met them in our lobby, where James had already set them up with visitor badges. "Jacob, welcome to Cipher Analytics," I said, extending my hand. He shook it warmly. "Thank you for making time on such short notice." He gestured to his colleagues. "This is Amanda Chen, my Director of Portfolio Strategy, and Ryan Foster, who leads our fintech investments." We exchanged greetings, and I led them through the office. I watched their reactions as we walked, Amanda's eyes tracking the whiteboards covered in algorithms, Ryan pausing to look at the wall where we'd mounted press clippings and awards, Jacob taking in the energy of the space, the clusters of engineers deep in discussion, the casual but focused atmosphere. "It's different from what I expected," Jacob said as we entered conference room B. "What did you expect?" "Something more corporate. Glass and chrome, everyone in suits. This feels more like a lab than a financial services company." "That's intentional," I said. "We're solving technical problems. The best solutions come from people who are comfortable and can think creatively. Suits don't encourage that." We settled around the conference table. I'd set up a presentation on the large monitor at the front of the room, but I didn't jump straight into it. Instead, I waited, letting them settle, reading the room. Amanda spoke first. "I've reviewed the materials you sent over. Your fraud detection rates are impressive. but I'm curious about scalability. If we were to roll this out across, say, 15 portfolio companies simultaneously, could your infrastructure handle that kind of rapid expansion? Yes, I said simply. But let me show you how. I pulled up a technical architecture diagram. Our system is built on distributed cloud infrastructure with auto-scaling capabilities. When transaction volume increases, the system automatically provisions additional resources. We've stress-tested it at volumes 10 times our current client load. Ryan leaned forward. What about customization? Amanda mentioned 15 companies. Each would have different needs, different risk profiles. That's where our modular framework comes in. I switched slides, showing the configuration interface. Each client gets their own instance with customizable parameters. They can adjust sensitivity levels, define custom rules, and integrate with existing systems. The core detection engine is the same, but the application layer is flexible. For the next hour, we went deep into the technical details. Amanda asked sharp questions about data privacy and regulatory compliance. Ryan wanted to understand our pricing model and unit economics. Jacob mostly listened, occasionally interjecting with broader strategic questions. I'd given hundreds of pitches and demos over the years, but this felt different. These weren't investors deciding whether to take a risk on an unproven concept. They were sophisticated operators evaluating a mature business for strategic fit. The questions were harder, the scrutiny more intense. I loved it. Let me show you the platform in action, I said, switching to a live demo environment. This is real transaction data, anonymized of course, flowing through our system in real time. The screen showed thousands of transactions scrolling past, color-coded by risk level. Green for clean, yellow for suspicious, red for high-probability fraud. Watch what happens when I introduce a known fraud pattern, I said, typing in commands. A cluster of transactions lit up red almost instantly. The system detected the anomaly in under 2 seconds. Traditional rule-based systems would have missed this entirely because it's a new attack vector. Amanda was taking notes rapidly. Ryan had pulled out his own laptop and was doing calculations. Jacob sat back, arms crossed, a slight smile on his face. Impressive, he said. But let's talk about the business side. You mentioned you're approaching profitability. Walk me through your path to get there. I closed the demo and pulled up our financial projections. The current burn rate is $3.2 million per month. Revenue is $3.8 million monthly and growing at 12% month over month. We hit cash flow positive in Q2 next year at current growth rates. Full profitability by Q4. That assumes the growth rate holds, Ryan pointed out. Correct. But we have strong indicators it will. Our churn rate is less than 2% annually, effectively zero in this industry. And our sales pipeline is robust. We have 12 enterprise deals in late-stage negotiations, worth $18 million in annual recurring revenue if they all close. What's your close rate historically? Amanda asked. 78% of deals that reach the pilot stage convert to full contracts within 6 months? She nodded, impressed. That's exceptional. Marcus knocked on the conference room door, entering with coffee and water. He set down the tray and caught my eye, a silent signal that everything was going well from his perspective. Thanks, Marcus, I said. He nodded and left, closing the door behind him. Jacob picked up his coffee. Let me be direct, Scarlett. What you've built here is exactly what we're looking for. The question is structure. Are you open to investment, or are we talking about a pure partnership arrangement? I'd been expecting this question. We're not actively seeking additional capital. Our last raise gave us enough runway to reach profitability with a buffer. But I'm always open to strategic investment if it comes with real value beyond money. Define real value, Ryan said. Access to your portfolio companies as clients, obviously, but also strategic guidance, board-level expertise, connections in markets we're looking to expand into. We're exploring international expansion. Europe first, then Asia Pacific. If you have portfolio companies or connections in those markets, that's valuable. Jacob and Amanda exchanged a look. Some silent communication passed between them. We have substantial European operations, Jacob said. 3 fintech companies in London, 2 in Amsterdam, 1 in Frankfurt. plus relationships with major banks across the continent. That's valuable, I agreed. Here's what I'm thinking, Jacob continued, setting down his coffee and leaning forward. A strategic investment, minority stake, let's say 8 to 10%, at a valuation that reflects your growth trajectory. Call it a $420 million post-money valuation. We come in with $35–40 million. I kept my expression neutral, though internally I was calculating rapidly. That valuation was higher than our last round, recognition of the growth we'd achieved. The investment amount would extend our runway significantly and give us capital to accelerate international expansion. In exchange, Jacob went on, you get guaranteed access to our portfolio companies. We'd structure it as part of the investment agreement that they have to at least evaluate your solution. We also provide strategic support. I join your board, and we facilitate introductions in European markets. What's the timeline you're thinking of? I asked. Due diligence would take 6 to 8 weeks. If everything checks out, which I expect it will, we could have terms signed by the end of year. Amanda jumped in. We'd want to review your code base, talk to your key clients, understand any technical debt or operational risks. Standard due diligence, but thorough. We're an open book, I said. We have nothing to hide. Our code is clean, our client relationships are strong, and we've been preparing for our next funding round, even though we weren't actively seeking it. Ryan was typing on his laptop. These unit economics work. The customer acquisition cost relative to lifetime value is healthy. If you can maintain these metrics at scale, this is a very attractive business. We spent another 30 minutes discussing specifics, board structure, information rights, potential follow-on investment provisions. Throughout it all, I maintained the careful balance of being enthusiastic without seeming desperate, confident without being arrogant. This was the game I'd learned to play over 5 years of fundraising. Show strength, acknowledge risks honestly, demonstrate that you understand both the opportunity and the challenges. By 5:30, we were wrapping up. I'll have our team send over a preliminary term sheet by Monday, Jacob said as we stood. Nothing binding, just a framework to start discussions. I'll review it with my board, I replied. In reality, my board consisted of me, Marcus, and 2 early investors who were relatively hands-off. But it sounded more legitimate to reference a board. We walked back through the office. Most of the team had gone home, but a few engineers were still at their desks, headphones on, deep in code. The dedicated ones who lived and breathed the work. Your team seems solid, Amanda observed. They're the best, I said simply. I've built a culture where people stay because they believe in what we're doing, not just because of the compensation. At the elevator, Jacob paused. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. How did Tuesday night actually go? After I left, I mean. With your father. I considered how much to share. It was complicated. Years of misunderstanding don't resolve in one evening. But we're having lunch tomorrow to talk more. I hope it goes well, he said, and he seemed genuine. For what it's worth, I think what you accomplished without his support makes it even more impressive. A lot of founders have built-in advantages. You earned everything the hard way. Thank you, I said. The elevator arrived. They stepped in, and I watched the doors close, taking with them a potential $40 million investment and access to markets that could transform Cypher Analytics from a successful startup into a genuine industry leader. I stood in the empty lobby for a moment, processing what had just happened. Well? James asked from his desk. How'd it go? Good, I said. Really good. The way you're smiling, I'd guess better than good. I laughed. Yeah, definitely better than good. I went back to my office and immediately called Marcus and Lisa into a quick huddle. We closed the door, and I filled them in on the meeting, the proposed terms, and the timeline. Holy shit, Lisa said when I finished. That's a massive validation of everything we've built. It's not done yet, I cautioned. Due diligence could uncover issues. Terms could fall apart during negotiation. But yes, if this closes, it's transformative. Marcus was already calculating. With that capital, we could accelerate European expansion by a year. Maybe more, We could also invest more heavily in R&D and get V3 to market faster. Let's not spend money we don't have yet, I said, though I was thinking the same things. First, we get through due diligence. Then we negotiate final terms. Then we close. But we celebrate a little now, right? Lisa asked. Because this is huge. Small celebration now, I agreed. Big celebration if it closes. We ordered pizza for the remaining engineers and spent the evening in the office, not working, but just being together, talking about possibilities. This was what I loved about the company I'd built. Not just the technology or the business success, but the people. The team who'd believed in the vision and helped make it real. By 8 o'clock, I was finally heading home, exhausted but energized. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow, I'd have lunch with my father and navigate a different kind of negotiation, one where the stakes were personal rather than financial, where the outcome mattered in ways that had nothing to do with valuations or term sheets. As I descended into the subway, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. Still on for tomorrow? I've been thinking about what I want to say. I hope you'll let me say it. I typed back. Still on. Noon at Bluestone. Whatever he wanted to say, I'd listen. That didn't mean I'd forgive easily or that one lunch would repair years of damage. But I'd listen. Sometimes that was where repair had to start. Friday morning felt different. Maybe it was knowing that in a few hours, I'd sit across from my father and have a conversation we should have had years ago. Maybe it was the lingering excitement from yesterday's meeting with Jacob. Or maybe it was just that October had finally decided to feel like autumn. Crisp air and golden light making the city look like a postcard. I chose my outfit carefully, not the power suits I wore to investor meetings, not the casual clothes I wore to the office, but something in between. Dark jeans, a cream-colored sweater, a leather jacket. Comfortable but put together. The armor of someone who knew her worth but wasn't trying to prove it. Bluestone Coffee was in a quiet corner of Greenwich Village, the kind of place that neighborhood locals loved and tourists rarely found. I'd discovered it years ago, back when I was still figuring out what cipher analytics would become, spending hours at their corner table sketching out algorithms on napkins. I arrived at 11:50, deliberately early again. Old habits. The cafe was moderately busy. A few people working on laptops, a couple sharing pastries, a group of students arguing cheerfully about philosophy. The barista, Miguel, recognized me and waved. The usual? He called. Not yet. I'm meeting someone. I chose a table by the window, positioning myself where I could see the door. At 11:58, my father appeared on the sidewalk outside, pausing to check the address on his phone. He looked out of place in his expensive suit, a Wall Street executive in a village coffee shop. But he pushed open the door and entered, his eyes finding me immediately. "Scarlett," he said, crossing to the table. "Dad." He sat down across from me, setting his phone face down on the table. A small gesture, but one I noticed. "Full attention, no distractions. Should we order?" he asked, glancing toward the counter. "I'll get us coffee." "What do you want?" "Just black coffee." "Thank you." I went to the counter, ordered 2 black coffees and 2 of their turkey and avocado sandwiches. Miguel made small talk about the weather while preparing the order, giving me a moment to breathe, to prepare. When I returned to the table with the tray, my father was looking around the cafe with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You come here often?" he asked as I set down his coffee. I used to, when I was first starting out. I'd sit here for hours, working through problems, trying to figure out how to make the business work. Alone? Always alone. The words hung between us, weighted with meaning. He heard it, I could tell. The unspoken accusation that I'd been alone because he hadn't been there. "Scarlett," he began, then stopped. Started again. I've been practicing what to say since Tuesday night. I had a whole speech prepared. But now that I'm here, it all sounds inadequate. "Try anyway," I said quietly. He took a breath. "I was wrong. About everything. About your choices, about your potential, about who you were and what you were capable of. I saw what I expected to see, a daughter who'd disappointed me, instead of seeing who you actually were. I sipped my coffee, waiting. This was his moment. He'd asked for it. When Jacob showed me that Forbes cover, he continued, my first thought wasn't pride. It was a shame. Shame that my own daughter had accomplished something extraordinary and I had no idea. Shame that I'd spent years dismissing you as a failure when you were building an empire. Shame that a stranger respected you more than your own father did. His voice cracked slightly on the last words. I'd never heard that vulnerability from him before. I've spent the last few days thinking about where it went wrong between us, he said. And I keep coming back to one moment. Do you remember when you were 17 and you told me you wanted to study computer science? I remembered. Of course I remembered. You told me it was a waste of time, I said. That computers were a hobby, not a career. That I should focus on business or law, something respectable. I was an idiot, he said flatly. I couldn't see that the world was changing. That tech was becoming the most important industry on the planet. I was stuck in my old ways, my old definitions of success. It wasn't just about the career choice, I said. It was about you never listening, never asking what I wanted, just assuming you knew better. You're right. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. I treated you like a project that needed to be corrected rather than a person with her own dreams and capabilities. And when you didn't follow my plan, I wrote you off as a failure instead of considering that maybe my plan was wrong. Miguel brought our sandwiches. We both murmured thanks, but neither of us touched the food yet. After you left for that storage unit, my father said, I told myself you'd come crawling back in a month, that you'd realize you needed me, that you couldn't make it on your own. When you didn't come back, I told myself you were too proud to admit failure. I never considered that maybe you were actually succeeding. I called you, I reminded him, multiple times. I tried to tell you what I was building. You were always too busy. I know. The words came out heavy with regret. I was too busy to pay attention to my own daughter's life because I was so focused on my own importance, my own deals, my own ego. A young couple entered the cafe laughing about something. Normal life, continuing around us while we excavated years of damage. Here's what I can't figure out, I said, finally voicing the question that had been bothering me since Tuesday. Are you sorry because you were wrong about me? Or are you sorry because I turned out to be successful and now I'm worth your attention? He flinched. That's a fair question. And I've asked myself the same thing. What's the answer? Honestly, it's both, and I hate that about myself. He met my eyes and I saw genuine pain there. I wish I could tell you that I'd have apologized regardless, that your success doesn't matter. But the truth is, seeing what you built shocked me into realizing how badly I'd failed you. Would I have had this realization if you were still just working at the diner? I don't know. Maybe not, and that makes me a terrible father. The brutal honesty was unexpected. I'd been prepared for excuses, for justifications, not for this raw admission of his own failings. At least you're being honest, I said. I owe you that much. He finally picked up his sandwich, though he didn't eat it, just held it like he needed something to do with his hands. I can't change the past. I can't undo the years of disappointment and dismissal. But I'd like to try to do better going forward. If you're willing to let me, what does that look like? I asked. Are you trying to do better? I don't know exactly, he admitted. I've never been good at the personal side of life. I know how to close deals and run businesses, but relationships? He shook his head. That's not my strength. But I'm willing to learn. To actually listen when you talk about your life. To ask questions and care about the answers. To be present instead of perpetually elsewhere. I took a bite of my sandwich, using the moment to think. This was what I'd wanted for years. Acknowledgement, apology, some sign that I mattered to him as more than a disappointment. Now that I had it, I wasn't sure what to do with it. I need you to understand something, I said after swallowing. I built Cipher Analytics without you. I proved I could succeed on my own terms. I don't need your approval anymore. I've learned to live without it. I understand. But, I continued, that doesn't mean I wouldn't appreciate having a relationship with my father. A real one where we actually know each other. Where you see me as I am, not as you wish I were. I'd like that, he said quietly. Very much. It won't be easy, I warned him. You've hurt me deeply over the years. That doesn't heal overnight, and I'm not going to pretend everything's fine just to make you comfortable. I wouldn't want you to. I'll probably be angry, sometimes. Resentful. There will be moments when I remember how you treated me, and it will be hard not to throw it in your face. I deserve that. I studied him across the table. This man who'd loomed so large in my life, whose approval I'd craved, and whose disapproval had nearly broken me. He looked older suddenly, more human. Not the invincible businessman, just a father who'd failed his daughter and was trying, however imperfectly, to make amends. Okay, I said finally. We can try. But this has to be real. Not showing up when it's convenient or when my success makes you look good. Real effort. Regular communication. Actual interest in my life. I can do that. Prove it, I challenged. Tell me something about my company that you learned from something other than that Forbes article. He thought for a moment. You have 83 employees and you're hiring 30 more by the end of Q2. Your revenue is on track to hit $45 million this year. You're working on version 3.0 with adaptive frameworks, and you still work shifts at Sal's Diner in Astoria because the owner gave you your first job and you don't forget people who helped you. I blinked, surprised. You actually listened at dinner. I'm trying to pay attention now. Better late than never, I hope. We ate our sandwiches in a more comfortable silence. Outside the window, Greenwich Village went about its business. Artists carrying portfolios, students heading to class, tourists with maps, delivery people weaving through pedestrians. The city I'd conquered, the place I'd built my empire. So, my father said eventually, Jacob Miller's investment. Are you going to take it? Still in due diligence. But probably, yes. The strategic value is significant. It's a good deal, fair valuation, and his portfolio access is valuable. That's what I thought. If you want, he offered carefully, I could introduce you to some other investors, give you more options for comparison. I don't need... I began automatically, then stopped. This was him trying, offering help without strings attached. I took a breath, reconsidered. Actually, that would be useful. More competition in the process gives me better leverage on terms. He smiled, small but genuine. I'll make some calls. We finished our lunch talking about business, safe territory, where years of dysfunction hadn't left landmines. He asked intelligent questions about my technology, offered insights about market positioning, and suggested strategies for European expansion. It was the conversation I'd wanted at 17, at 20, at 25. Better late than never, he'd said. Maybe he was right. At 1:30, we both needed to leave. Him to a meeting in Midtown, me back to my office. Same time next week? He asked as we stood to go. Make it every other week, I said. Baby steps. Every other week, he agreed. And Scarlett? Thank you for giving me another chance. Don't thank me yet. Earn it, he nodded, accepting the challenge. We walked out together, pausing on the sidewalk where our paths diverged. Him heading north, me toward the subway. One more thing, I said before we parted. That Christmas when you said I'd wasted my potential, I need you to know how much that hurts. His face crumpled. I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry, I know. But I needed to say it. To make sure you understood. I understand. Good. Then I'll see you in 2 weeks. I walked toward the subway, not looking back. My phone buzzed, Lisa asking how lunch went, Marcus with an update on the TechCrunch interview, Priya confirming next week's demo schedule. My life, full and complete without my father's approval. But maybe, just maybe, with room for him in it now. The subway platform was nearly empty, the Friday afternoon lull before evening crowds. I stood waiting for the train, thinking about the journey that had brought me here, from that storage unit to Forbes cover, from dismissed daughter to respected CEO, from invisible to undeniable. My father hadn't made me successful. His rejection hadn't broken me. I'd done it myself, built something remarkable from nothing but determination and talent and relentless work. But perhaps there was space now for something else, not the relationship we'd had, but something new. Built on honesty instead of expectation, respect instead of disappointment, reality instead of illusion. The train arrived and I stepped on, finding a seat by the window. As we emerged from underground, crossing back toward Brooklyn, I caught my reflection in the glass. 30 years old, successful beyond my wildest dreams, finally at peace with who I'd become. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from my father. Thank you for lunch. I'll do better. I promised to earn this second chance. Dad. I smiled and typed back, see you in 2 weeks. The train carried me home, toward the company I'd built, the team I'd assembled, the life I'd created entirely on my own terms. My father's approval no longer defined me, but his effort to understand me finally after all these years. That was worth exploring. Sometimes the best victories aren't the ones where you prove people wrong. They're the ones where you prove yourself right, where you build something so undeniable that even those who doubted you have no choice but to see the truth. I'd built Cypher Analytics without my father's help. I'd succeeded without his blessing. I'd proven every assumption he'd made about me wrong. And now, maybe, we could build something else. A relationship based not on what he wanted me to be, but on who I actually was. It wouldn't erase the past, but it might create a different future. And that, I decided, was enough. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.